This is API Case Files.
Hear this message. Tune this channel. Like E.T. said, phone home. This is API Case Files, the official podcast of Aerial Phenomena Investigations. It's June 2014, and this is Episode 4.
Welcome. This is Antonio Paris, the founder and director of Aerial Phenomena Investigations.
And I'm Marsha Barnhart, Chief of Investigations for Aerial Phenomena.
API is an organization dedicated to scientific, objective investigations of unidentified aerial phenomena. This podcast is produced to inform the public and the investigator community about what we do, how we do it, and how we can help. We also want to help those who want to aspire to become field investigators to understand what is involved and how to proceed.
Well, we have a lot to cover in this episode of API Case Files, but first, I'd like to remind everyone that we'd be very happy to hear your feedback on aerial phenomena and on this podcast. We want to make sure your questions get answered.
I've set up a new forum on our website at aerial-phenomena.org, and we'd like you, the UFO community, to visit there and let us know what you think about any related topic to UFOs.
Also, please leave a review on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast aggregation service is. It's the best way for you to help the podcast. In just 3 episodes of API Case Files so far, we've had over 5,300 downloads. So thanks for listening, and please let us know what you like and what you don't like about the podcast. Now, in this episode of API Case Files, we're going to hear from a new API member, Robert Kolb. He's going to discuss photographic analysis in a discussion with Antonio and Paul Carr.
We also have part 2 of a conversation with a skeptic. We'll hear from a good friend of ours, Norio Hayakawa, about a conference in New Mexico that he's organizing this October.
And we'll have Antonio's Investigator's Notebook, Unidentified Science, Part 4, and we'll have our 20-second recommendations from the team. But before we get started, I'd like once again to remind everyone that if you are a witness to a recent UFO sighting, then please go to our website at aerial-phenomenon.org and click on Report a UFO. If you're willing to speak to us and you would like us to investigate your report, then make sure you enter yes in the question, do you want us to contact you for an investigation? Remember, witness anonymity is always assured.
Yes, and please make a sketch of what you saw as soon as possible, and then forward it to Aerial Phenomena. Write all the facts that you know about the sighting. You might be surprised what turns out to be important. We will investigate the best and most credible cases that we receive. And we may even visit the site when possible, with the permission of the witness, of course.
Nearing the end of May, we had a total of 49 cases. Now, of those 49, nearly half, 21, wanted to make a report but did not want an investigation. So that information we took as it came in and added that to our database. Of those 49 cases, there were 28 that we opened an investigation on. 7 of those were closed right away because the witness would not respond to our inquiries. Then 14 of those were closed after full investigation. 5 turned out to be man-made objects. 4 turned out to be known natural phenomenon. 4 happened to be undetermined. There was 1 case of clear pareidolia, and there was 1 case that we referred to a paranormal group that was from the area of the report. 6 cases currently are in active investigation status. So we've had a pretty busy time so far, and we've had some very interesting cases. And we are a little bit perplexed by people who say they want an investigation but then never get back to us when we write to get a phone number for an interview or when we ask for further information or clarification. But sometimes people just don't want to be bothered with it. They just kind of want to get a report off their chest. Now, the thing about that is that it does kind of cloud statistics. It does kind of cloud the database, because somebody can say they saw an unusual light in the night sky, but until we have the opportunity to talk to somebody and get the time and the date and be able to narrow things down, then there could be erroneous information out there. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it's anything other than an overflight of the International Space Station or something of that nature, which is often misidentified. Or say, for example, a flare, an iridium flare from a satellite. That can sometimes be, and has been, mistaken as what people say is a UFO that is kind of beaming down on them. If you've ever seen an iridium flare from a satellite, it's pretty awesome. And if you don't know what it is, you could default to thinking that you'd just been interacted with by a UFO. So these things that we cannot narrow down and pinpoint and investigate and assign as a reason, then they kind of spoil the database on real sightings. So we have to keep that in mind. When you look at a database like National UFO Reporting Center, you have to understand that this is raw data coming in, that typically people don't have an opportunity. There isn't the manpower for most of these to be investigated. But when you have the opportunity to look at these, clearly half of the cases probably are man-made. A good portion of them are probably misidentified natural phenomenon. That's just how it shakes out. That's not saying we're not having interaction of some sort, but right off the bat, I can tell you, having done these investigations, it's going to shake out that way typically. But at any rate, there are real good investigations going on right now, and there are really good sightings that we're having a hard time wrestling down to an identified source. So if you have a UFO report, do be sure to contact us through our website and give us an opportunity to try to figure out what it is. All right? And you can be a part of that. You can be a part of the investigation, and you can be a part of the solution to finding out what's going on. All right, so do make a report. All right, that's it for the Case Files report from your Chief of Investigations. Now, Antonio?
Here's our new analyst, Robert Kolb. Paul Carr and I had a discussion with Robert about photographic evidence in UFO cases.
Robert, why don't you start by telling us a bit about your background when it comes to image analysis?
Well, my first experience with imaging was probably about 12, 13 years ago. I started by using microscopes to study kidney cells. And so that got me very interested in imaging and imaging analysis. From then on, over the last 10, 15 years, the microscope and image analysis has been a staple of my research. So obviously that lends itself to studying images. And so while I was at different universities, I've been called in to help analyze data acquired from microscopes. And that's just basic image analysis. So that's the brief background.
Let's talk about what happens when we get an image in. Someone sends API a photograph for a set of photographs. We get that image in. They say, I think this is something weird, something I saw in the sky that I didn't understand. How do we proceed? What's the first step?
Well, I think the first step is to put it under some type of eyeball test. And I know that sounds a little off, but to someone who's looked at a lot of images, the first step is an eyeball test. And to say, does it look too good? Okay, even in research data, when I come across an image and it looks a little too good, then that's a red flag for me. Because I know the limitations of the microscope. I know the limitations of what they call probes that light up parts of the cell. So I know all those limitations. So I could tell if an image has been doctored just by a quick glance. Now, with a cell phone camera or something that doesn't have very quality lenses, then that becomes a different issue because you don't know what type of cell phone camera they're using, what's the megapixels. So that becomes a little trickier. But the first thing is just to say, hey, does that that too good to be true? If it's too good to be true, then it probably is. The second thing is I would take an image and run it through some software that tells where that image has been before. Okay, what's the history of that image? So if you get an image and you run it through some software and it says it's been opened in Photoshop or it's been opened in Aperture, you got to chunk it because it's not the raw data. So if you're approaching images from a scientific standpoint, you have to be dealing with the raw data. And if it's been opened in Aperture, if it's been opened in Photoshop, you have to chunk it really. It's fun intellectually maybe to look at and to think about, but if you want scientific data, it's no good. Now, if they have
at that point, we could go back to the witness and say, "Can we have the original file, please?" Right? That would be the
right.
first. In fact, that's probably the first thing we should ask the witnesses. Please give us the file straight out of the camera.
Absolutely.
So we would approach this almost like a chain of custody approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. That's
we haven't even discussed chain of custody, but you have to try to establish that.
A digital chain of custody.
A digital, that's what I swear.
Yeah, what software it's passed through, right? As well as what hands it's passed through.
Right. I mean, is it your grandmother's image, and did she open it up in, on her PC and looked at it through Picasa? I mean, all of that stuff is non-scientific software, and as soon as you open it and then save it, you have manipulated data. Now, to the casual person, that may seem trivial, but if you think about repeated opens and saves, especially, I'll try not to get on my Photoshop soapbox, but that's the worst for opening an image and saving it because it adds data. It doesn't just take away data, it adds data. And who knows, those 4 or 5 pixels that were manipulated just by an open and save may significantly alter the image as it goes through processing.
Let's say we have an image. We've determined what kind of camera it came out of. We might even have custody of the camera. We have the original witness who said that they took the picture and that it was in their hands until they gave it to us. And we think it's the file right out of the camera. Where from there? The person could still be lying to us, right? We could still be getting a hoax of some kind. Right.
At this point, the digital hoax would be tricky because even in the headers of the image, there's tons of information. People know about this information, that it can give GPS coordinates, it can give all kinds of stuff. But there's a lot more in that header than people realize. And people say, well, you could just change the header and fool someone. The EXF data, no, you can't actually. There's too much information in there to manipulate it all to fool someone that really knows how to go through that data. So first, the next thing is just to go through the EXF data. Look through the headers and see, make sure it does match up to the camera they're saying it matches up to. And then what I suggest doing is go through the error level analysis test. Now, if we have a raw image, okay, and let's say it's in a TIFF format, we then save it to a JPEG format. And what the error level analysis does repeated saves. So JPEG, remember, is a compression level analysis. A compression, okay? So every time you compress that image, okay, you're degrading the image. So if you do theoretically 99 saves as a compression format, okay, the image should degrade equally. If everything is uniform on the image and you resave it over and over and over, then it should degrade equally throughout. So if the image has been manipulated, the area of manipulation, which most likely is not the exact same resolution as the original, that area will degrade differently. And then you'll get an effect around that image, some type of blooming, some type of a rainbowing effect around that area of manipulation. Then that point you chunk it.
So if someone gives you a photo and your ELA says 78% compression, and they swear by God it's the original photo, they're pretty much lying,
I think it's easy
right?
to underestimate how much people will lie, right? I still don't think you can really fake someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to digital imaging. People talk about CGI being so great. It is great, but to a trained eye, it's still artificial.
Yeah, I always, my motto is, and I tell this to everybody, the more expensive software you use to hoax us, the easier it is to detect. And that's always been like that since,
Absolutely,
Sherlock Holmes
absolutely. I
investigative
mean,
photography.
our ideal world will be when a professional photographer who has some credibility gives us that image. That's the ideal situation. And I think that lends me to think going after hoaxes, all of that is necessary. But to me, what's more important is how to acquire an image correctly and educating people in this community and people maybe on the fringes of this community to say, hey, this is how you take a proper image. This is how you handle the data. So that if they ever caught in that situation where they do see something in the sky, they'll know how to take an image of it correctly.
Okay, well, this is a good time to maybe give them the short course on that.
Well, I think the first thing is, I know this sounds silly, but you got to relax. You can't freeze up. And second, find somewhere to put your camera on. Okay? Don't rely on stabilizing the image. Post-processing, it's just like computers, right? Garbage in, garbage out. There's only so much processing you can do of an image. So if you can, put your camera on something to steady it. Okay? And second, take as much as you can, as whether video or snapshot, but take sequence after sequence after sequence, not just one or two. Get the bad shots in there too. Get the out of focus shots in there too. Because if you take several out of focus shots plus an in focus shot, you know what you have then? You have a 3D image. So with the right software, if you have the right out of focus shots, you can put that's still information. The data is not lost. It's still data, and that can be reconstructed. And that's one of the big things I work with imaging is 3D imaging, is taking lots of images out of focus and in plane and putting them together. So stabilize the camera in some way, take a deep breath, and take an image or an area for reference. This is huge. If you're just pointing the camera up into the sky, it doesn't give us any frame of reference. Pan down, show us the horizon, give us an XYZ, show us something so that we know, okay, the telephone pole is right there, the car is right here, my neighbor house is 150 feet in front of me, you know what I mean? So get your coordinates mapped out with the image.
One of the best photo cases I've worked so far, there was clearly a house in the foreground, and we knew exactly where the photographer was standing when he took the shot. We were able to determine the exact angular size of the object because we knew where that house was. And
yeah. So you could extrapolate a lot of information from that. Yeah, absolutely.
It looks like a crappy photograph if you look at it, but when you realize there's so much good reference information in that frame, it's actually an excellent photograph.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I was saying, those photos are the good ones. People want to see, close encounters type stuff. And that, that's assuming we know what this is. And you're assuming so much when you go out there looking for flashing, rotating lights with beams coming down from the center. Don't try to be objective.
If you have a camera that supports RAW format, should we use that?
Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely the format you want to save it in, because that's the least compression. There's no compression technically.
It's like a digital negative, basically.
Right, and then TIFF after that. Your TIFF files are the next best form of. And then once you have the image, the next thing you want to do is to download it to your computer, make a copy of it, put it in a folder, and do not touch it. Then with the copy that you made, if you want to play with it, change the brightness, contrast, all that stuff, that's fine. But leave that raw data in a folder for the investigators or for someone who may want to look at this later from a valid scientific viewpoint. Ideally, you'd want to keep a notebook that says, this is where I was sitting, and these are my frame of references within the image. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you just talked about keeping the chain of custody tight by making that copy and not touching it, right? So the
Right,
original
that's-
photographer has that. What we need for evidential purposes is we need to know the person who took the image, and they need to come step up. It may be we'll protect their identity, but they have to say, yeah, I took that.
Right. That gives a lot of validity to the image. I mean, you think that someone would want to take credit for something,
Right.
but that gets into the whole ridicule factor, right? So we don't.
So we have this image. We're going to get it from the witness, and then at that point, we should be able to do a lot of analysis. Let's say you've determined it probably is a legitimate image. What's the next step for you? What do you want to understand? What do you want to know about that image?
The size, obviously.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. What's its dimensions? Is it bigger than a bread box, right? I mean, how do you determine that? I think the next thing is to establish a profile for that image. In other words, go back and look at the databases of information. Have there been other sightings in that area? If we had a nice profile for where all images were acquired, okay, then you could see the likelihood of that image being real just based on statistics, right? So, I mean, you could theoretically do statistics so well that X sightings is likely to occur here or there based on probability. So if you have a good image, what's the probability that it was seen by someone else, not necessarily in the same night, but on a similar week or the same month? So I would try, in other words, what I'm trying to say is I would try to have some type of corollary information to go along with it. Is this an isolated sighting, or, is this within the realm of possibility of being seen by somebody else and they may have an image as well? Because that's the beauty if you had two images, right?
Right. I think that's one area where the whole field has kind of dropped the ball, is in understanding those kinds of statistics. That's probably a discussion for another. Yeah, it does.
I think the main thing is making sure it's not a hoaxed image. And then from there, that's the scientist interpretation of the data.
We already talked about faking images. You think it's really difficult, even for a highly skilled manipulator, to fake a digital image. Is it impossible? I mean,
Sure.
Can you imagine somebody could fool you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 But I mean, they would have to really know what they're doing.
Right.
But and that person and those people are obviously out there. Yeah. But I don't think that those people are the ones that have enough time to sit around and do hoaxed images.
Right. They're usually getting paid a lot of money for doing special effects or something like that.
Right. They don't, or it would probably be a scientist or a researcher, somebody that understands that this is, some people take this stuff seriously, and why mess with someone else like that? You're going to have a very specific demographic and type of person that's a hoaxer, I think.
See, okay, so for our own purpose, you talked about what the citizen scientists should do out in the field. When we're out in the field, the API team, what kind of equipment should we take? What kind of images should we be looking to capture? Should we just go with all video? Should we go with photographic evidence?
For me, I would prefer video, just because a video is just nothing more than a whole bunch of images, right, strung together.
Yeah.
So to me, video makes the best, unless you had an object just hovering, obviously the best case scenario, you've got a stable image in front of you. Then ramp up your camera to the highest resolution, get your tripod out, take that beautiful time life cover photo. But for the average person, I think video, because there's so much more information to be gained from the video, because you are going to be moving it around, and it lends itself to cleaning up and analysis just like a regular image would. Plus, I think with the camera, you really, stabilizing is a big issue. And unless you have a high-end camera with a lens stabilizer, it's going to be tricky to get a stable image. So if you've already conceded you can't get a stable image, just go with the video. That's my personal, because the video cameras are such so high end now.
Antonio could speak to this as well. There seems to be a big gap between witness expectations when they give us an image and what the real needs of serious scientific investigation are.
Yeah, they'll give you a fuzzy little light, it looks like a squiggly worm or something, and they expect you to, tell you it's
it seems
flying
like it's
saucer.
more like this just confirms that I'm an honest person. But then you say, well, I really didn't know, what time it was, what date, and so on and so forth. Oh, and a lot of times they'll drop the subject.
This is why. This is why the interview process is one of the most important things. You can have the worst photo taken, and a really good, honest witness wants to be part of the investigation. He'll be truthful. He'll engage, and that's always key to me. The hoaxer, those interviews last very quickly, and as soon as they start smelling that you're leaning towards a hoax, Paul and I, we see this all the time. They disappear off the radar. So it's I'd rather have a cheesy photo and a genuine witness who really saw something and you can tell that they're not BSing or anything. And this is after multiple interviews, not just one. Then having that excellent, beautiful photo of some metallic object, and the witness never responds, never conducts an interview, or is haphazard. You give them 20 questions and they only respond to 2. And that's not even including the photo analysis and the forensics, that part. But the witness is the key to everything, from solving a murder to UFOs.
The image evidence can be, I think, my opinion, can be very important. I wouldn't dismiss any image evidence out of hand. And it doesn't have to be beautiful.
No, yeah, I would agree with that. That's why, the first thing I said, if it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Yeah. Because, otherwise we would have just file cabinets full of beautiful UFO images.
Nope, and not everyone is running around with a Canon 70D or 60D with a zoom lens right next to them. It's usually a cheesy iPhone or some type of phone that, it might take great standstill photos, but it's not going to take a nice photo or something that's, kilometers away.
I think that's a great point, because people just assume, I don't want to get into the whole what's a skeptic, what's not a skeptic. That's not for me. But the whole thing of, well, everybody's got a camera in their pocket. Why aren't we getting better images? Well, because we don't have high quality cameras in our pockets. Like Antonio was saying, just because you have a camera in your pocket doesn't mean you're going to take a good picture of something, especially at night, potentially miles away. And the person's moving, they're jumping up and down. Mama, look, there's a UFO outside. Come on. You're not going to. If that's why I think there are some people out there. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he did a lot of work for Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters, and he's got a team of people that are using high quality cameras positioned in different places, and they're just taking. They're taking. That's the way you approach this. You have to take it with scientific rigor. If you're gonna, you don't run around the science lab, just mixing chemicals together and say, "Woo, I'm doing science," right? If you're going to take this from a scientific perspective, you better use the right equipment, you better have the right funding, and you better have scientific training. That's another soapbox is how many people are just throwing around the word scientific in this UFO field. Even I question, how much of this can be scientific, because are we really developing hypotheses that we can test? We're such in the stages of just gathering information. That's really all we're doing.
Yeah. I think it's certainly not normal science in the sense of you have a strong body of theory that backs you up. We don't have anything like that.
No. This is it's in the infant stages, and so nobody's even come up with a theory. not a theory, a hypothesis. I mean, you've heard that old scientific story, right? That a guy walks outside and he's looking under the light outside of the bar, and he's just looking on the ground, and another guy comes out and says, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm looking for my car keys. And he said, well, where did you drop your car keys exactly? And he said, over there, across the street. He says, well, why are you looking here? And he says, well, that's where the light is. Right?
Yeah.
So that's, you can only look where the light is. And, right now all we have is cameras and eyewitnesses.
Yeah. But I mean, the hope is that if you look at the history of science, it always starts with a lot of confusion and wrong ideas. And eventually somebody gets a hold of the right concept, and it grows from there. The whole history of science is full of examples like that.
I think some type of spectral camera is going to be the way to go. Something that can look, most of the listeners to this will, and you guys know, we only see a very small part of the spectrum, right?
Right.
So a spectral camera, something that can see outside of the visible spectrum on both sides, is probably where we're going to start seeing something that we could start comprehending. Something that can do spectral analysis in real time at the handheld level. I think that's the future of imaging.
Yeah, those things exist, but they're incredibly expensive.
They're not handheld. They're not at Best Buy.
They're not at Best Buy.
However, I have some hope. The kind of imaging spectrometers we have now, they're starting to fly them on aircraft and balloons.
Sure.
And it could be.
Well, I think once we kind of mentally evolve and realize that we don't see everything, and we want to start looking outside of our visible spectrum at stuff, we're going to open up a whole new world to look at. And the first thing that's going to go is money, right? Money's going to tackle that, and with that will come imaging and cameras and ways to play in that spectrum outside of the visible.
And now here's my good friend Norio Hayakawa, who is going to tell us about an upcoming conference in New Mexico. And I'll also be appearing at that conference. I'll be talking about my new book, Space Science. Moreover, I'll be signing books and DVDs, and I hope to meet up with the Case File listeners there as well. Also appearing at the conference will be David Marler, who we interviewed in episodes 1 and 2 of this podcast, and he'll talk about his new book, Triangular UFOs. What follows is an excerpt from a conversation that Paul and I had with Norio recently. In episode 5 of this podcast, in about a month, we'll get the full conversation with Norio, who has decades of UFO experience as a UFO researcher.
This is a serious conference. We only have 5 speakers. That is Mr. Antonio Paris of the Area Phenomena Investigations. And then, of course, we have Mr. Greg Valdez, who is the son of the late Gabe Valdez, the former state patrol officer in New Mexico in charge of Dulce. He'll be speaking, and then the David Marler, he will be speaking, and then, of course, I'll be talking about the UFO culture. Then also we have one person that some of the researchers consider, not a really nuts and bolts type, but his name is Travis Walton. From a psychological standpoint, I think his testimony is very fascinating.
That's October 4th this year in
Yes.
Rio Rancho, which is near Albuquerque.
That's correct.
Announcements will be made soon about tickets and so forth, accommodations.
Yes, that's right.
I hope I can attend, and hope we can do a live API case files.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Next on API Case Files, we'd like to present part 2 of an interview with an anonymous skeptic who is rethinking his views towards UFOs.
There seems to be a healthy trend that I think we should encourage. UFO investigators are becoming more skeptical, and skeptics are becoming more open-minded. We should all be committed to learning and clarifying the facts, and what we can learn from scientific investigations, and not in selectively confirming anyone's belief system.
As you're talking, I'm finding this all very interesting, and I had a couple ideas I thought I'd toss in, and I'm curious as to see if your team has considered this. I know you touched on someone else within your team who's interested in, working on the misidentification problem. The thought occurs to me that this is, clearly it's so fundamental to the reliability of reports. But think of an analogy between the UFO issue and, let's say, birds. If you've never really cared about birds or haven't been interested in them, if you're out in nature and someone says, well, take a look at this bird. Oh, what about that one? You won't necessarily know what you're looking for. You'll certainly notice a difference, let's say, between a bird that's black and one that's white. But in terms of the details that biologists would study, all sorts of things. Shape of the wing, shape of the beak, where the eyes are located, more on the front of the head or the side. Well, on birds, they're usually on the side. You're just going to miss a lot of details like that. So, but that's the case with everything. Architecture. If you don't really pay attention to buildings, and suddenly you're asked questions about, well, what buildings do you like and why? What are architectural details? It's going to be a completely new question, and you're going to be struggling to sort of identify things from memory that, matter or have meaning. Same with UFOs. If you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, if you haven't spent time thinking about how the mind can be misled, if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at the sky, you're sort of potentially in a position where you're seeing something for the first time. So anyway, the thought is that as part of an investigation, I wonder if it might be useful to approach people with an iPad in hand and have categorized a number of different possible misidentifications. And you would have photos, you have little videos, and without any kind of contaminating prodding or questions, even though, these examples might do just that, which could confound the results, but in any case, you have to work out how you could possibly make this valid over time. You would hand this person these pictures and videos and say, well, do any of these look familiar? And if someone points at something which is like obviously, the contrail of a 747 going overhead, with its wingtip lights blinking, well, then you may have an indication they didn't really see anything out of the ordinary. That's one thing that occurs to me. Another is, and this gets back to, I think, one of the things that as a skeptic has really prevented me from taking this whole subject seriously in the past, which is that if you listen to enough media on this topic and you read enough in terms of the kinds of questions that people give to witnesses, I, for one, keep on having the impression that, well, why didn't you ask that? Or what about this? Well, no, let's go back a second. Let's really systematically flesh that out. Let's really make sure there's, we're eliminating possibilities here. In other words, I just continually have the impression that the kinds of scientific due diligence, systematic questions that you would ask someone, that doesn't really happen that often. So it strikes me that there's potentially quite a bit of room for improvement in terms of the kind of rigor that people apply in terms of their interview techniques. I'm not sure if you've had that.
I agree with that, yeah. In fact, we were founded by Antonio Paris, whose background is in criminal and counterintelligence investigation. He's got a lot of training in witness interviews and witness. Law enforcement is a little different from science. I don't think it's quite the same objective, but yeah, I think if you listen to an interview and a lot of investigators, you'll hear a lot of confirmation bias working its way in.
Oh, yeah.
And to the interview that once they seize on a theory, it's like, I'm going for those questions that confirm my theory. And we don't do that. We keep it very, very rigorous. What you want to do is ask questions that are carefully designed to elicit the right memory. But the problem is I don't think we really understand the psychology of that from the UFO perspective. I think we're trying to get the witness to give us a meaningful summary of exactly what they remember. And that's hard because as they tell the story, the memory starts to change.
Yeah.
Memory is not something that you just play back in your head. It's constructed out of lots of things. And
right.
It is a very difficult problem. And it's one of the reasons that we are generally more interested in multiple witness cases where we can corroborate what one person says with what another person says. We've had cases where we had one person who spoke English and another who didn't. Well, the person who spoke English gave us this lengthy discussion of what he had seen. The person who didn't gave us a sketch, and her sketch completely contradicted what he had said.
Huh. Oops.
Yeah. So, and then after he realized that was the case, he didn't even he refused to talk to us anymore. We could no longer contact him. So You're right. We have to be very, very rigorous in how we ask questions. We have to ask the same question in more than one way. And we have to have a defined set of data we always collect regardless. Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot of people recognized over the years, but they don't always practice it. The quality of field investigations varies very widely. And I have to admit, even an organization, sometimes we've had people that didn't follow the process. Those people are no longer with us, but it is a problem. So I think that's one thing that Tony has been very tough on about is having that process and having it, trying to give it a really strong backbone.
I think the problem is also compounded, and I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with anything I'm about to say, is that we come from a cultural background that if we take the surveys of public understanding of science into account, we have to assume that plus just background information, scientific literacy is not particularly high. And one thing I've even seen in discussions among people who have been proposing that we take a more rigorous approach to the topic of UFOs is that there's a surprising degree of, misstatement about the nature of science, exactly. All these terms that have to do with science. What is exactly science? What is an experiment? What is a hypothesis versus a theory? What counts as evidence? What's valid? What's validity? What's significance? What's relevance? All the terms of critical thinking. I'm really not at all familiar with the MUFON protocols for training people, but it would seem to me that just based on these background considerations that if you were to sort of roll the dice and take a random person from society, that they'd have to basically be taken through a pretty darn extensive and rigorous program in, let's say, philosophy of science, scientific knowledge as it currently exists, standards of, critical thinking and so forth. And I have been devoting my adult life on and off to the pursuit of, hopefully, or maybe I'm just deluding myself, better and better degrees of clarity and rigor, responsibility, et cetera, in my own thinking. And it is hard work. I still make mistakes. Mistakes that, I wind up going, God, that's embarrassing. I thought I sort of was getting good at this. So if you're going to be going out in the field and you really haven't undertaken a really strong course of correcting this cultural deficit of critical thought, it would almost be expected that people going out in the field would be, just making, almost programmatic, kinds of mistakes. But that's just my take from a distance.
Well, part of it is that many of these organizations none of the organizations really have much money at all. So very few people have ever done UFO investigation professionally. That is for a living. And most of those were 30, 40 years ago. So the problem is you can't get the best and the brightest in the field. It's just, they're off, designing nanostructures or. Yeah,
they're already in science.
They're already in science and it would be a career limiting move for them to even on the side to investigate UFOs. You get people who are professors emeritus who don't care, who might jump into the fray, but you don't get a lot of a young scientist. And the kind of training you're talking about, really, that's where you get it. You get it. Unfortunately, you don't get it in high school.
You don't.
And you should. And my kids reach high school age. I'm getting much more excited about that. And I don't see that training in critical thinking and in understanding what science is about and how to reach a reliable conclusion about anything that is taught. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. We don't have that kind of education.
Yeah.
I think we're behind in the U.S. here. We're behind a lot of other countries in that regard.
Oh, we are, definitely.
So just in our willingness to teach critical thinking and because, a lot of people are afraid that if you start questioning things, you'll question everything, which you will, probably. And the thing is, we all have our biases. We all have our blind spots. That's not going to change. As long as we're human, we're going to have that. But we need to be aware of our own failings and misgivings and biases that we all have when we go into any kind of effort to learn the truth about anything, or just ask, as I'm always saying, an effort to ask better questions. I still think of it kind of like the ancients who knew that there was lightning and knew that there was but they had no idea what it was. They knew that the sun was in the sky and gave them warmth and light, but they had no idea what the sun was. And that would be no excuse for not investigating and trying to learn more. But they weren't going to figure it out in a week, a year, a generation, a century.
Right.
They had to be patient.
Just a couple of, it's maybe more than a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a survey that came out that showed that, this just floored me, that it was like 23% of the population didn't know that the Earth rotated about the sun. They thought it was the other way around. And I don't mean that as a kind of condescending criticism. I mean, we're all in this culture to get out there, and we're all learning all, at various points. And I could go on at length about all the stuff that I don't know. But that was very disturbing to me. That degree of unawareness about that.
Yeah, that's striking out looking. I mean, we're not. I thought every school kid got that. Maybe they forgot it. I don't know, but yeah, I think you're right. We have a long way to go, and we certainly have a tremendous amount of ridicule that's been brought down the UFO topic by people who are most enthusiastic about it, and people they claim they blame government conspiracies, they blame disinformation agents. But the reality is that they are the ones who've really made it hard to speak seriously about it.
Yeah, we have a kind of asymmetrical but linked set of problems. Like you were just saying, on the one hand, we have people who are discrediting the field through, just the lack of intellectual seriousness. At the same time, we have, a skeptic movement, which I think has a number of blind spots that I'm still trying to work out. And I think we've only touched on, just a little bit of the risk. There's risk on both sides. If we don't study this, then we're neglecting, if there is something genuine here, quite possibly the most fascinating question we've ever faced as a species. And who doesn't want to get to the bottom of this? At the same time, if the skeptics continue to dismiss this as nothing to see here, go about your business, then what happens if we get to a point where really we've established that there is something genuine here for any reasonable person and it's not of human origin? We could be facing a kind of backlash, I'm fearing, against, number one, skepticism, because on one of the most important questions, scientific questions we've ever faced, they got it wrong. And there could be a generalized backlash against reason and science, because if the commanding heights in culture of reason and knowledge have completely blundered on this topic, then why should the public trust them about any other thing? That's also a worry, I think, that we have to contend with. So how we sort of make bridges between, on the one hand, the call to believer camp, and on the other side, the skeptics, I think is a really important question. I think both have to come together to some kind of middle point, and that's a tricky proposition.
Yeah, and I've made my own efforts in that regard, and I've struggled. I did a talk last year for the National Capital Area Skeptics on skeptical UFO investigation, and I thought they probably thought they were going to get a lot of poo-pooing of the topic, which I didn't really do. I gave them kind of some bad news. I said, look, the good news, what you're looking at here is that, yeah, there's a lot of nonsense in this field. Agreed. That it's all nonsense, not so sure. And that's why I'm investigating. And
right.
There was a mixed reaction to that.
Yeah.
And so I'm working on both sides, trying to get the believers to think more scientifically and the skeptics to think, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's ask the question, not as RETs here, but because I don't think we know how to answer that question. But the question we want to ask is there something here that is anomalous, that doesn't fit? And let's be willing to take the null hypothesis seriously. Maybe there isn't. Maybe we just got it all wrong. And so I think if as long as we leave the null hypothesis in the mix, I think that skeptics may come over and be willing to talk about it. So that's kind of where I've left it. I mean, it's still very much a work in progress, and probably in 20 years, we may not have budged it much. I don't know, but that's the direction I'm pushing in.
My best wishes in that regard. I personally intend to do a lot more reading on this, and after a couple of years, I'm not sure where that will put me, but I think I'm at the point where I think that there definitely is something worth looking into here. And like I said, I think I'm off the agnostic fence and putting a foot down into the, there is something here of non-human origin camp. But there's so much cultural unlearning and so many biases that have to be corrected to get to a point where we can approach this like we would, any other kind of open question.
I appreciate that, and I thought you're right extremely well, and I hope you'll keep researching and write some more as you learn more. But I'm going to keep working in the field and learning as what I can. When I see something that doesn't fit, I'm pretty sure it doesn't fit. It doesn't mean it's a spaceship from another planet.
Right.
It just means that it's something. I mean, I don't want to fall into that fallacy of assigning it to that because I don't know what it is, but
right.
It certainly does mean that there's something there that I want to know more about and study more carefully and see if anybody else has seen the same thing. I'm not optimistic there's going to be a tremendous amount of progress in my lifetime. I think I'm the medieval scholar who wants to know why some stones attract iron and some don't. He's not going to find out in his lifetime, but he's going to lead to that.
Yeah, it's from what I've gathered from you and your website, I think it's definitely a worthy effort, and I think it'll help things along. I mean, I had a sighting when I was younger, but I don't think that's what has led me to this point of being sort of how would I put it, a skeptic of skeptics on this, because this happened a long time ago, and even though the memory seems clear because it was so striking to me, I just know that I'm fully human and that my memory isn't necessarily better than anyone else's. In fact, I'm sure it's quite worse. And who knows what I could have, sort of constructed of that. If what I seem to recall what happened when I was younger is anything resembling what any other person there would have perceived, then it's a very interesting topic. You may be doubtful that you'll make any progress on this, but who knows? Maybe you'll be the one who makes some breakthrough at some point. It's got to be someone.
Yeah. My biggest hope is that we would get to the point where for a young scientist to spend some of his time looking at it, or her time, would be not a stigma.
Right.
And maybe even get a small amount of funding for it. I think that would represent enormous progress. When we start getting the best and brightest looking at the topic, I think then with the most modern tools, I think we could, then we can start pushing forward, because when we start making progress, we make progress fast. We have to get over all those humps. We went from, in physics, there was an enormous amount of progress in 40 years. We got past a certain point, then boom, it exploded. At some point, we may get to that explosion with respect to our understanding of intelligent life in the universe in general, not just through studying UFOs, but studying exoplanets and through SETI and other, I'm not sure where the breakthrough is going to come first. It may come from astrobiology. It may come from lots of places.
Right.
Or it may just be some synthesis of all that. When they finally realize, what? It would make sense if we from time to time saw something in our skies that was technological but not human. And how would it make sense, and what kind of thing would we expect to see? We may get to that point. It may come from out of the blue. It may come from it's probably not going to come from UFO field investigation is my sense of it. But still, that's where I think I can contribute. So that's why I'm doing it. Well, anyway, thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
I appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Antonio, it's time for your regular feature, API Case Files Investigator's Notebook.
everyone. This is Antonio Paris with the Investigator's Notebook. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important aspects of investigating UFO phenomena, and that is the toolkit. The toolkit is exactly what it is. It's a set of tools that you take with you for an investigation, whether it's out in the field or during a witness interview. Now I'm going to go down the list of the standard items that are included in the toolkit when conducting aerial phenomena investigations. And then I'm going to go back to one or two of these three items and emphasize the importance of the toolkit. Inside our toolkit, for example, we have a state driver's license or state ID, the Aerial Phenomena Basic Investigations Guide, a mobile phone or satellite phone, a standard report of investigation, a compass, a GPS, a magnifying glass, some type of clipboard or notebook, maps of the area, sketching paper, a pen, pencil, or marker, a star chart, digital or hard copy, a digital camera with extra batteries, Ziploc bags, a tape measure and ruler, flashlight with extra batteries, some string, the latest weather report for the area, a good Swiss Army knife or something similar, a pair of tweezers, digital audio recorder with extra batteries, a pair of binoculars, a poncho or rain jacket, a first aid kit and a snake bite kit, a supply of tent stakes, a small shovel, latex gloves, a computer laptop with a charged battery, food and plenty of water, and, if you have any, business cards for your organization. Now that's a long list, but however, they're very important. When you look at the list, it's kind of like if you're going camping or hiking. There's just certain items that make sense in case of an emergency. For example, the first aid kit is very important, and it always goes with aerial phenomena during any investigation. We also like to bring rubber gloves or latex gloves and some type of Ziploc bag. This is important. In the event that you do find alleged evidence, whether physical or trace, it's important that you collect it properly and place it in the plastic bag. But more importantly, it's important that you don't touch it with your bare hands and fingers. The Basic Investigations Guide is also important because it outlines the investigative process when you're out in the field. The digital camera is extremely important, and it's going to be used to record any physical evidence that you find out there. The tape measure and ruler is also used when you're collecting evidence. For example, let's say you find a piece of physical evidence that you found on the field site. It's important for the person looking at the photo to get a good sense of how big the object is. So what you do is you take the tape measure or the ruler, you place it alongside the object without touching it, and then you take a photo of the object. A digital recorder is also important. Now it's important to emphasize that when you're recording any type of witness interviews with the digital recorder, that somebody else is alongside of you transcribing it on a piece of paper. Far too often, I have noticed that when investigators get home, they lost the digital recording. And finally, during these days, it's very important to bring a mobile phone or satellite phone in case of emergencies. So there you have it, the toolkit. For more information on the toolkit, you can contact me directly at director@aerialphenomena.org or go on our website, www.aerial-phenomena.org, where you'll see a list of these items.
You're listening to API Case Files. And now, Paul Carr with his fourth installment of Unidentified Science.
As I promised at the end of episode 3, this time I'm going to take a little break from talking about virtuous scientific work. Such work is hard, slow, and often reaches a great divide where no progress seems possible. But we have gone too far to quit. So it's good to have a little fun once in a while and indulge in speculation. As long as you clearly label speculation as just that, there is no harm in it. And these little imaginative expeditions can often stimulate really useful new ideas. After all, that's what science fiction is all about. Like good science fiction, we like our speculations to be informed by the best science we have, admitting that there are leaps across the gap of our ignorance that are simply made up for the amusement of thinking about it. That said, the implications of our ignorance can be completely serious. For example, how long on average do technological civilizations in our galaxy live? No one knows. But this is the answer to the seventh term in the Drake equation. I cover that in depth on my blog, Dream of the Open Channel. And the implications are important. Right now, I am going to speculate that there is some aspect of the UFO phenomena that is intelligent, very intelligent. In fact, much smarter than we are. I can't yet make a persuasive case for this, although many informed people think it's likely, if not certain. As we discussed in episode 2, the biggest problem is forming an actual scientific hypothesis from this speculation. So I'm going to have to use a couple of heuristics that have somehow gotten themselves labeled as laws. I don't know if these heuristics are really valid in this case, but I want to follow where they lead my imagination. The first heuristic I mentioned in episode 2, and it is called Clarke's third law. It states that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. To achieve magic, something that is perceived as real but also appears to be impossible or highly puzzling, takes only a slightly more advanced technology, and some people make a good living doing just that. Stage magic is really a technology for gaming human perception, memory, expectations, suggestibility, and attention. Imagine a technology many generations ahead of what a Las Vegas illusionist has available. What you would perceive and remember after such technologies directed toward you might make no sense, could seem absurd and dreamlike, and would likely not be an accurate representation of what was actually there. The second heuristic is called Haldane's Law. Again, not a real law, but it appears to comport with experience. The biologist J.B.S. Haldane originally stated it as, the universe is not only queerer than we imagine, it is queerer than we can imagine. We know of no reason that this would not apply to intelligent life and alien cultures and technologies as well as natural phenomena. This tells us that whatever we expect of an ET civilization is probably wrong and not sufficiently imaginative. Our best conjectures of why they would travel the vast distances between stars, what their purpose would be upon arrival, and how they would propose to relate to the ape descendants they find here are likely all hopelessly, laughably off target. So taking for the sake of argument the premise that some UFOs are the products of ET civilizations, then the only thing we can reasonably expect is to be dazed and confused, which many of us are anyway without any help from the skies. What hope is there then for science? Well, if ET is playing an epistemological game with us, then there is little hope. We don't know the rules of the game or anything about the other player except that he is allowed to use magic. If he is far smarter than we are, paying close attention, and determined to keep the picture hopelessly clouded, then it will remain so, and scientific research is a fool's errand. In that case, we just have to wait for the rules of the game to be revealed to us. But if that is not really what is happening, there may be hope. For one thing, the part of the noise that most resists scientific inquiry may be a signal, and perhaps this is a puzzle we can solve. Let's think about that some more later. Second, access to a highly advanced technology is not equivalent to deep understanding. The confusion and puzzlement might exist on both sides, and we have been unaware for a long time that our task is to find a way through the fog. We may understand what is going on before ET does. Science is clearly a key partner in that search, but there is something else I don't even have a good word for yet that we will need to find. Epistemic humility requires us to admit that we may not have at hand all the concepts we need, but our history teaches us that we usually find those concepts in the long run, or they find us. Last, I think we have the technology to test the hypothesis that the UFO phenomena, after the residual of explainable cases is removed, is indifferent to human observation. We need good surveillance of multiple areas. These areas should comprise varying terrain and population densities and experience a variety of weather conditions. For example, Montgomery County, Maryland. We take one or more of these areas and quietly place them under a tight skywatch. Other areas would have no skywatch. If indifferent to human observation, the number of sightings over time reported by persons in the watched area, controlling for other variables, would be about the same as in the unwatched areas. What is more, the watch itself, conducted with a degree of scientific rigor to exclude known classes of false positives, should also turn up some anomalies over time. Then, we remove the skywatch and see what happens. What this would require is a little funding, lots of tight-lipped and well-trained volunteers, and a lot of patience. Perhaps all three of these are in short supply these days, but that's what real science takes. Any clear variation in sighting reports from random chance would be a signal and would lead us toward asking a better question. Better questions asked with greater understanding are what we're about. If you need firm and final answers, best look elsewhere. In the next Unidentified Science, I'm going to talk about skepticism, what it is, what it isn't, and why we need it if we are going to move forward.
Alrighty, next on the venue, let's have our 20-second recommendations. Let's start with Antonio.
Today I recommend the website flightradar24.com. This is a cool website that we use because we can try to determine whether or not an object was an airplane or not. For example, if someone reported something over their home and they were not sure if it was an aircraft, we can go to flightradar24.com and determine whether or not there was an aircraft in the area. That's www.flightradar24.com.
Paul?
Test. I recommend a small, portable audio recorder. I am very fond of my Zoom H2N. It records at good quality to an SD card, doesn't burn through batteries, and you can use it as a USB microphone, which is what I am doing right now.
Well, our UK-based investigator Lawrence's recommendation is that everyone check out what he feels is one of the most factual and convincing UFO documentaries available now. You can find it free on YouTube, and it's based on the book by Leslie Kean called UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. By the way, we have a link to that on our show notes page, so be sure and check for that. Thanks for the pass-along, Lawrence. Now, my recommendation is a reminder to practice discernment when it comes to UFOs, especially when viewing YouTube videos of purported UFOs. There are a lot of hoaxers out there, folks. Empower yourself against these people who are maliciously manipulating thousands of people. Discernment is a component of healthy skepticism. Use your rational mind to question, reason, weigh, and decide. That is practicing discernment. that's about it for API Case Files Episode 4. Please let us hear from you if you have any suggestions or ideas. For more information on the organization or to report a UFO sighting, go to aerial-phenomenon.org. In Episode 5, which we hope to get to you in July, we'll have a much longer conversation with Norio Hayakawa and more discussion about some hot API cases. We'd also love to answer some of your listeners' questions, so get them to us at our forum on aerial-phenomenon.org. All the web links we mentioned are in the show notes at apicasefiles.libsyn.com.
Thanks to Robert Kolb, to Norio, and to the API team. Until next time, this is API Case Files.
This has been API Case Files Episode 4. This podcast is a production of Aerial Phenomena Investigations. Episode 4 was produced by Paul Carr. Your hosts were Antonio Paris and myself, Marsha Barnhart. Music heard on this podcast is by All India Radio, DJ Spooky, Boxcat Games, Norio Hayakawa, Paper Navy, and Totality Music. All music is licensed under Creative Commons. The spoken content of API Case Files is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 4.0 license. I'm Marsha Barnhart. Join us again for API Case Files.